His coat hit my shoulders just as the glass door shattered behind me. I did not turn around right away. I was too busy trying to breathe, too busy holding my ribs together with both arms as if I could keep my whole life from breaking apart the same way that door had. The hospital lobby lights were too white, too clean, too cruel for the kind of humiliation I had dragged in with me. A security alarm screamed overhead. Someone had kicked the entrance hard enough to spiderweb the glass, then slam it inward. I knew who it was before I saw them. The debt collectors. They had been calling for weeks about my mother's medical bills, debts I never signed for and somehow still inherited in every way that mattered. Tonight they had found me at the end of a double shift, still wearing pale blue scrubs under a thrift store coat with a busted zipper. I had tried to slip out through the side parking lot. They had followed. "Elena," one of them shouted from the doorway. "You don't get to disappear on us." I finally turned. Two men stood under the red flash of the alarm, wet shoes squeaking on the polished floor, their anger louder than the siren. One pointed at me like I was a thing tagged for repossession. My first instinct was shame. My second was to run. But the man beside me moved first. He stepped in front of me, so naturally it took me a second to realize what he was doing. Broad shoulders, dark suit, rain on the sleeves. Expensive wool, warm from his body, now around mine. He had taken it off without asking and put it on me like covering a wound. "Back away from her," he said. His voice was calm, which somehow made it more dangerous. One of the men laughed. "This isn't your business." "It became my business," he said, "when you chased a woman into a hospital." Until then, I had only registered fragments about him. He had been sitting alone in the waiting area near the vending machines, tie loosened, staring at a phone he never unlocked. He looked like the kind of man who belonged in black town cars and corner offices, not under flickering fluorescent lights at nearly midnight. A stranger with the face of someone used to being listened to. The collectors came closer anyway. The taller one reached for my arm, and the stranger caught his wrist in midair. Not a warning, not an argument. A stop. Everything in the room changed at once. The night staff froze behind the reception desk. One security guard started toward us, radio in hand. The shorter collector cursed and shoved the stranger in the chest, hard enough that his dress shoes slid on the floor. And still he did not move away from me. "You want money?" the stranger asked. "Then speak to a lawyer in the morning. You want to threaten her again? Do it in front of security cameras and police." That landed. Not because they feared the law, I think, but because he sounded like a man who could make one phone call and ruin whatever passed for business in their lives. The shorter one looked me over with ugly satisfaction. "You hiding behind rich men now?" I felt the words like a slap because I had no answer. I did not even know this man's name. The stranger did something I did not expect. He looked at me, not them. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. It was the first choice anyone had offered me in months. Yes would mean I needed help from a man I did not know. No would mean staying here under the eyes of nurses, guards, and strangers while two men dragged my private ruin into public light. "I want them gone," I said, and my voice shook only once. He nodded, then turned to security. "Call the police. Tell them they damaged hospital property and assaulted a patient." Patient. I almost corrected him. But the lie protected me better than the truth. The two men backed off the moment the word police entered the room. Their bravado thinned first, then their voices. One cursed under his breath. The other tried to recover what little dignity panic had left him by straightening his jacket and pointing at me as if I had wronged him by refusing to collapse quietly. Security moved in before either of them could step closer again, and the three members of the hospital night staff stood near the doorway in stunned silence, caught between procedure and pity. The stranger never raised his voice. That was what unsettled everyone most. He simply stood there in his dark rain-damp coat, one hand in his pocket, the other resting at his side, as if power was not something he performed, but something the room had already agreed belonged to him. When one of the debt collectors muttered that this was a family matter, the stranger looked at him with calm, lethal indifference. "No," he said. "This became a criminal matter when you put your hands on her." The sentence changed the air. For the first time that night, I was no longer being cornered as a daughter who had failed to pay for someone else's mistakes. I was being seen as a woman someone had wronged. The officers had not arrived yet, but the threat of them was enough. Security escorted the two men out with the kind of force that made arguments useless. The door shut behind them, and the room exhaled. One of the nurses adjusted the blanket around my shoulders. Another quietly picked up the metal water cup that had been knocked over during the struggle. The third checked the monitors of the sleeping patient across the curtain, pretending not to watch me break apart and hold myself together at the same time. Then it was just the stranger and me in the harsh white light after midnight. "I can leave too," he said, "if that feels safer." Safer. The word hurt more than it should have. Safety had become such a small dream that hearing it offered without a price felt almost suspicious. I studied him for the first time without fear swallowing all reason. He looked to be in his early 30s, expensive without trying to prove it, controlled in the way men usually were when they had spent years being obeyed. But there had been nothing cold in the way he stepped between me and danger. Only certainty. Only restraint. "You don't know me?" I said. "No, you still got involved." "Yes." "Why?" For the first time, his expression shifted. "Not much. Just enough for honesty to appear where authority had been. Because you looked like you were asking for help and apologizing for needing it at the same time." That nearly undid me. Rain tapped softly against the hospital window. The world beyond the glass was blurred silver and black, a city too busy to care what happened under fluorescent lights at 1 a.m. I pressed my fingers into the thin blanket, trying to stop them from shaking. "I can't go home tonight," I admitted. The words felt larger than everything that had happened before them. Debt could be argued with. Bruises could be hidden. But having nowhere safe to go was a kind of truth that stripped a person bare. He did not ask the wrong questions. Not where was home. Not why I could not return. Not who had failed me first. Instead, he reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief, setting it on the bed beside me like an offering he would not force me to accept. "There's a hotel 6 blocks from here," he said. "I can pay for a room. Separate floor. Your name doesn't need to be shared with me." I gave a bitter laugh. "That sounds like the beginning of a mistake." "It could be," he said. "So make the rules." The sentence landed between us with unexpected weight. Outside, a siren passed and faded. Inside, my choices narrowed into something painfully simple. Morning arrived without mercy. Thin winter light slipped through the hotel curtains and laid itself across the chair where Daniel Whitmore's coat had hung all night, as if daylight had come to expose every foolish thing I had done after midnight. I sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed except for my shoes, my fingers wrapped around a paper cup of stale coffee I had made in the machine near the elevator at 5:30. I had made the rules. No names that mattered. No questions that would bruise in the morning. No touching except what I asked for, and only because I had asked. He had agreed to all of it with a calm that felt less like seduction and more like respect. That had been the most dangerous part. Daniel Whitmore had taken the armchair by the window instead of the bed. At some point in the night, after the shaking stopped and the tears burned themselves empty, I had fallen asleep with my head against his shoulder and one hand twisted in the sleeve of his dress shirt. He had not moved me. He had not taken advantage of my exhaustion. He had simply stayed. Now real life was back, sharp as broken glass. An envelope rested on the small table between us. Plain. Unsealed. I knew what was inside before I touched it, and the knowledge stung. I said no money, I told him. His gaze stayed steady. "It isn't payment." I opened it anyway. Cash. More than enough to keep my landlord patient for another month. More than enough to stop 2 men from showing up at my door and turning fear into spectacle. Beneath the bills was a business card turned face down. Humiliation came first, hot and immediate. Then anger, because part of me had already calculated exactly how many problems that envelope could silence. "I'm not for sale," I said. "I know." His voice didn't harden. That almost made it worse. "The room is paid through tonight. The cash is for the damage done to your scrubs and your phone. Both happened because you crossed my path." That's a neat way to dress up pity. It's a practical way to keep you from walking back into danger before breakfast. That should have made me grateful. Instead, it made me feel seen in the places I had fought hardest to hide. I set the envelope down as if it might burn me. "You don't know anything about my danger." "No," he said, "but I know what panic looks like. And I know what it means when someone keeps checking the door even after the threat is gone." Silence spread between us, softer than shame, but heavier than comfort. He was right. I hated that he was right. I stood, grabbed my shoes, and put them on without looking at him. Last night stays last night. A flicker crossed his face then. Disappointment. Maybe, or the private acceptance of a man used to losing arguments he could have won with force and chose not to. If that's what you need, it is. I walked to the table, took the business card, and slid the cash back toward him. For the first time since I had met him, Daniel Whitmore looked almost irritated. Keep it. No, you may need it before pride starts paying your bills. The words landed harder than cruelty would have. Cruelty, I knew how to fight. Concern with sharp edges was different. My chin lifted on instinct. And you may be used to solving things with money. He rose then, not threatening, just suddenly too tall for the small room. I'm used to solving the problems I can solve. That's the difference between us, I said. Mine don't disappear because a card says they should. I placed the business card on top of the envelope, perfectly aligned, like returning evidence to a sealed file. Then I picked up my bag and headed for the door. His voice stopped me with the gentlest thing he could have said. At least let me call you a car. I almost said yes. Almost. The hallway outside the hotel room smelled like lemon polish and expensive silence, the kind that made my scuffed shoes feel louder than they were. I kept walking before I could turn around and make a softer mistake than the one I had already made. By the time the elevator doors closed, Daniel Whitmore was gone behind brushed steel and carpeted distance, filed into the same category as warm hands in cold weather, brief, dangerous, not meant to be depended on. Real life was waiting exactly where I had left it. The bus ride downtown felt longer than it should have. My phone stayed dark in my coat pocket, not because no one wanted me, but because too many people did for the wrong reasons. When I stepped off near St. Catherine Memorial, the sky was the color of old receipts. I crossed the street with my bag clutched close and saw all 3 members of the hospital night staff standing near the side entrance, finishing the shift that had witnessed me come apart only hours earlier. One leaned against the brick wall with a coffee cup. One smoked despite the NO smoking sign. One was checking her watch with the tired impatience of someone who had children to get home to. Their eyes found me at the same time. No one said anything cruel. Somehow that was worse. Pity had a way of entering a room before words did. I lowered my gaze and reached for the side door, hoping to slip inside before my face could finish explaining itself. I was one step away when a black SUV rolled to the curb with the smooth confidence of money. The rear door opened first, then another. 3 people got out in tailored coats and practical shoes, each carrying the clipped focus of people who lived by calendars and consequences. Daniel Whitmore's executive team. I knew they belonged to him before I knew why they were here. People who worked for men like Daniel carried a certain clean precision, as if even their concern had been professionally ironed. The tallest of the 3 approached me. Elena Parker? Every muscle in my body tightened. Yes. We're here from Whitmore Holdings. His tone was careful, not arrogant. Daniel Whitmore asked us to deliver something to the hospital administration personally. The smoking orderly went still. The one with the coffee straightened. The woman checking her watch looked from them to me, then back again, as if trying to reassemble the version of me she thought she knew. Heat crawled up my neck. Then deliver it. We also need your signature, the woman from the executive team said, stepping forward with a leather folder. There are financial documents related to a private emergency grant. I stared at her. A what? A hardship fund, she said. Retroactive, effective immediately. It covers the remaining balance on your mother's treatment debt that was transferred in error to your personal file, as well as the collection actions attached to it. For one long second, the street noise disappeared. Transferred in error. Attached to my personal file. The words rearranged the last 2 years of my life with surgical cruelty. I took the folder from her and flipped through the pages with numb fingers. Hospital billing notices. Collection records. My name on obligations that should have died with paperwork I had never been allowed to see. At the bottom of one page sat an internal authorization request, denied twice, then approved at 7:30 that morning. Approved by Daniel Whitmore. No, I said quietly. No, he doesn't get to do this. The tall one held my gaze. This isn't a favor. It's a correction. That should have comforted me. Instead, it split me open. Across the street, 2 men stepped out of a rusted sedan like bad history given legs. The debt collectors from my past. I recognized the cheap jackets, the hard faces, the casual way they occupied space as if pressure itself were a profession. They had called me at dawn, at midnight, outside work, outside grief. The sight of that rusted sedan turned my stomach colder than the wind between the buildings. A minute earlier, I had still been standing under clean glass and moneyed light, trying to understand why Daniel Whitmore had stepped between me and humiliation as if my dignity had become his problem. Then the past crossed the street in cheap jackets and heavy boots, and I remembered exactly how fragile a life could be. One of the debt collectors lifted 2 fingers at me like we were old friends. Elena Parker. The way he said my name made it sound owned. I didn't move. Traffic hissed behind them on wet pavement. Across the sidewalk, Daniel Whitmore's executive team had just disappeared inside black cars, the polished kind with doors that closed like secrets. Daniel Whitmore was still beside me, one hand in his coat pocket, gaze steady, unreadable. The shorter debt collector looked at him, then back at me. "You've been harder to find." I wasn't hiding, I said, though we all knew that wasn't true. I had been hiding in plain sight for years. In extra shifts. In low-rent apartments. In silence. "You missed 2 payments," the tall one said. "Your mother's debt doesn't vanish because you cry in better neighborhoods." Something hot and sharp climbed up my throat. Daniel Whitmore turned his head then, not toward them, but toward me. "Your mother?" he asked quietly. I hated that question because it was gentle. "My mother is gone," I said. "What she owed isn't." The shorter man gave a humorless laugh. "And now what do we have? A rich witness." Daniel Whitmore took 1 step forward. Not threatening. Worse. Controlled. "How much?" I snapped toward him so fast my neck hurt. "No," both men smiled at that, because refusal from someone drowning always sounds theatrical. The tall one named the amount. It wasn't impossible money to Daniel Whitmore. That was the cruelest part. To him it might have been a nuisance. To me it was another year of giving up groceries, sleep, and whatever remained of a future that belonged to me. Daniel Whitmore reached for his wallet. I caught his wrist. That was the first time I had touched him in daylight. His skin was warm. Mine was shaking. "If you pay them," I said, low enough that the men had to lean in to hear, "then I lose the last thing that is still mine." His expression changed. Not softer, not harder. Clearer. The debt collectors exchanged a look. They had expected fear, pleading, maybe collapse. They had not expected me to stop rescue with my own hand. "I signed for part of it after the hospital bills," I said. "After the funeral. After every bad choice that came before me and every practical one that came after. I know what it is. I know what it cost. If this gets settled, it gets settled by me." The shorter one scoffed. "Pride doesn't make payments." "No," I said, "but witnesses do." I pulled my phone from my bag before I could lose my nerve. "Say the amount again." Slowly. Their smiles faltered. The tall one straightened. "You recording us?" "I'm documenting a debt collection outside my workplace after repeated off-hours contact." I looked from one man to the other. "If you're legal, that won't bother you." For the first time, pressure shifted off me and onto them. Daniel Whitmore said nothing. That silence helped more than any check could have. The shorter one cursed under his breath. The tall one recovered first. "Fine. You want legal? You'll get legal." He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and shoved it toward me. "Court notice." We were going to enjoy delivering it in person. I took it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. 7 days, he said. After that, they don't just come after wages. They come after whatever is attached to your name. They walked back to the sedan without another word, but victory still trailed behind them like exhaust. My hand was still wrapped around Daniel Whitmore's wrist. Cold air slid between us while the sedan's taillights disappeared at the end of the block. My fingers were still locked around Daniel Whitmore's wrist, not because I wanted comfort this time, but because I needed something solid while the words on that paper kept burning through my skin. 7 days. It sounded less like a legal deadline and more like a countdown attached to my chest. I let go first. "What is this really?" I asked. "Not the debt. Not the threat. You knew something the second you saw their faces." Daniel Whitmore did not answer right away. The glass doors behind us reflected both of us back in a warped silver frame. My cheap coat, my trembling hand, his dark suit, his silence so controlled it almost looked cruel. Almost. Then he did something he had not done once since I had met him. He stopped managing the room. "Get in the car," he said quietly. "If I tell you here, you'll have nowhere to sit when it hits." I should have refused. Pride had carried me farther than kindness ever had. But pride was also the reason I had hidden too much for too long, and the court notice in my hand had just proved how expensive silence could become. So I got in. The city passed in wet streaks beyond the window until we reached a parking garage beneath one of his office buildings. Not the polished lobby upstairs. Not the world of clean marble and curated smiles where I had already felt too visible. He took me somewhere lower, quieter, past concrete columns and a private elevator that stayed dark because he never pressed the button. "I had someone look into the case 2 days ago," he said. I turned to him so fast the paper cracked in my fist. "You investigated me?" No, his jaw tightened. "I investigated them." That was worse in a different way, because it meant he had believed me enough to act before I asked. It meant his silence had not been indifference. It had been movement. He faced me fully then, and for the first time I saw strain under all that discipline. Those 2 men aren't collecting for a bank. They bought private family debt that should never have been sold in the first place. The signatures were transferred through a shell company. The account is tied to a liquidation from a care facility your mother stayed in before she died. My throat closed. I had spent years believing my mother's unpaid medical obligations had collapsed onto me like a collapsed roof. Ugly, random, unavoidable. I had accepted shame because shame was easier than asking who profited from grief. Daniel Whitmore kept going. Each word careful, each one worse. "The shell company reports to a holding group. I know that group because my father used to invest in it." The parking garage seemed to tilt. I stared at him. "Used to." Before he died. His voice lowered. "And before I took over enough of the family business to start tearing some of it apart. I understood it in pieces at first. Then all at once. The men threatening me were not just scavengers from my past. They were feeding off a machine built close enough to Daniel Whitmore's world to stain him too." "That's why you've been quiet," I said. It wasn't a question anymore. You weren't protecting your image. You were trying to find out whether your name was sitting at the end of the chain. He did not flinch. "Yes." The truth hurt more because it was honest. I laughed once, sharp and joyless. "So I was right to keep my distance." "No," he said, and that single word landed harder than any apology. "You were right to demand the truth." He reached into his briefcase and handed me a folder. Inside were copies of purchase transfers, account records, and one page marked with notes from his legal office. At the bottom, there it was, a recommendation to settle the claim quietly through a corporate intermediary. Efficient, clean, invisible. My stomach turned. The paper shook once in my hand before I forced it still. Streetlights spilled across the folder, turning every line into a blade. Quiet settlement. Corporate intermediary. No public trail. The debt that had stalked me for 3 years had not been some random cruelty after all. It had brushed against his world, his money, his legal office, his silence. I looked up at him. "How long did you know they were connected to me?" Daniel Whitmore did not step closer. For the first time since I had met him, he seemed to understand that distance could be a form of respect. "I knew the names when my legal team flagged the transfer route," he said. "I did not know it led to you until the hospital." Anger rose so fast it made me dizzy. "That's supposed to help?" No, his voice stayed low. "It is supposed to be true." The city moved around us anyway. Cars passing, a siren somewhere far off, cold wind slipping under my coat. But everything inside me narrowed to one ugly fact. He had seen the machine from the inside, while I had been ground under it from below. I handed the folder back, then changed my mind and clutched it tighter. "Your money made people like them brave." My silence did worse. That answer should not have mattered. It did. I hated that it did. I started walking, not toward home, because home was a one-room apartment with unpaid notices and a refrigerator humming over almost nothing, but toward nowhere I could name. Footsteps followed a few feet behind me, then stopped when I stopped. "Do not follow me out of guilt," I said. "I'm not." I turned. "Then why are you here?" His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the strain of finally saying something without strategy behind it. "Because I have been trying to classify what happened between us as a mistake, and it was not. Because every decent reason to stay away from you is standing next to one indecent truth. I love you enough to tell you the version of me you should walk away from." The words hit harder than the cold. Love, not attraction, not responsibility, not pity dressed up as tenderness. I laughed once, sharp and broken. "You do not get to say that after handing me proof that your world helped ruin mine." "I know." "No, you don't." My throat burned. "You go home to heated floors and people who answer your calls before the first ring. I count groceries before I buy them. I know what it costs to need something. I know what it costs to be ashamed of needing it. He took that in without defending himself. Then let me know it too. I stared at him. What does that even mean? It means I shut down the settlement channel tonight. It means the two men who came after you will not touch another account tied to my company again. It means tomorrow morning I tell my executive team exactly what legal office buried this and why. He paused. And it means if being near me humiliates you, I leave. If being near me endangers you, I leave. But if the only thing stopping us is pride, mine, yours, or the distance between our lives, I am done letting that decide for you. The folder pressed into my ribs as I folded my arms around it. His executive team. Publicly confronting his own structure was not a gesture. Men like him protected systems because systems protected men like him back. If he did what he just promised, he would stain his own name. That should have felt like justice. Instead, fear arrived first. You think this becomes simple if you burn something down for me? I asked. It does not. People like your board, your investors, your friends, they will not see a woman you care about. They will see a liability with overdue bills and a family mess tied to her name. They can. And when they decide I trapped you, when they decide I slept my way into safety. The paper trembled between my fingers because every word on it was true in the cruelest possible way. My debt, my mother's old medical balance folded into my name. The collectors who had followed me across years and neighborhoods. Every stain I had spent my adult life trying to scrub clean. None of it would disappear because Daniel Whitmore looked at me like I was worth defending. I lifted my eyes to him under the streetlight. You can survive gossip, I said. I can't survive becoming your scandal. For the first time since I had known him, he did not answer with force. He just stood there, jaw tight, the city noise moving around us like cold water. Then he said, "What do you want me to do?" The question broke something open in me because it was not control. It was choice. I want you to protect your life, I said. And I want one clean thing in mind. I held the folder back out to him. Do not fight them for me. Do not claim me in front of them. Let me leave before they turn this into proof that I was using you. His expression changed then, not to anger, but to injury. I had not seen that on him before either. You're asking me to do nothing. I'm asking you to let me keep what little dignity I have left. That landed. I saw it. He looked away, toward the black car waiting at the curb, toward the towers that carried his name in polished glass and lit windows. The world he came from could absorb impact. Mine could only bruise. When he finally nodded, it felt like hearing a door lock from the inside. By 9 the next morning, I understood what his silence cost. The hospital night staff had barely finished handing off their charts when the news reached the break room. 3 screens glowed above the vending machines. Daniel Whitmore stood at a long conference table in a dark suit, his executive team behind him, and every financial anchor in the city was repeating the same sentence. He had resigned as acting head of the family foundation and stepped back from 2 pending merger decisions effective immediately. A reporter called it an unexpected retreat. One of the night nurses muttered that rich men always landed on their feet. I couldn't breathe. This was not nothing. This was not stepping carefully around me. This was Daniel taking his own name out of the blast radius before anyone else could use me to hit him, and in doing that, handing his enemies exactly what they wanted. Weakness. Instability. Blood in the water. I left my coffee untouched and walked outside into the sharp morning wind. My phone shook in my hand before I answered. I did what you asked, Daniel said. The traffic on the avenue roared so loudly I had to press a hand over my other ear. You stepped down. I removed every formal point where they could say you influenced a decision. My throat tightened. That was not what I meant. It was the only way to make your name untouchable to them. Untouchable. The word hit me like a bruise. No one had ever made themselves smaller, so I could stand without being crushed. What did it cost you? I asked. A pause. Too long. Daniel. Enough, he said quietly. By noon, I knew what enough meant. The 2 debt collectors from my past were waiting across the street from my building, leaning against a dented sedan like they had all the time in the world. Their threats had once felt personal, ugly, small. Today they felt coordinated. One of them smiled when he saw me, and that scared me more than shouting would have. Congratulations, he said. Your rich friend is having a bad day. I slid down my spine. What do you want? Nothing new. Payment. His smile widened. Only now the number changed. He named an amount so high my body went cold. You can't be serious. Interest. Expediency. Trouble costs money. I understood then. I understood then. They were not asking for money anymore. They were asking for leverage. The taller one watched my face and knew I had done the math. Daniel Whitmore was bleeding in public because he had tied himself to me in private, and now they wanted to turn that wound into a business model. If I say no? I asked. He shrugged. Then we keep talking. To reporters. To board members. To anyone who likes a scandal with a woman in the middle of it. For the first time in months, I did not feel cornered into panic. I felt something cleaner than fear. Decision. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and held it low enough that they would not notice the recording light. Say it again, I said. The amount. He did. Slowly. Smiling. The other man added, and tell your millionaire he should pay fast if he wants his name to stay pretty. I let them finish. Then I looked straight at both of them and said, no. Their smiles fell out of place. I don't owe extortion, I said. I owed grief. I owed survival. I paid those for years. I'm done. I turned and walked away before my legs could remember how to shake. Daniel's building was 3 blocks away. By the time I reached the lobby, my breath was thin and my palms were damp, but my mind was clear. The receptionist started to rise, then stopped when she saw my face and pointed me straight to the private elevator. When the doors opened, Daniel was already there. He looked tired in a way expensive suits could not hide. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled. The executive team stood a few feet behind him, silent, tense, useless in the way people become when a crisis turns personal. I barely registered them. All I saw was him. He stepped forward. Elena. I held up my phone. I recorded them. Everything in his expression changed. Not relief exactly. Respect. I played the audio. The room went still except for the sound of those men naming a price on my shame and his reputation like they belonged to them. When it ended, Daniel looked at one of his executives. Call legal. Then call the police. Not a settlement. Not a quiet arrangement. We do this clean. The executive moved immediately. I looked at Daniel. No more paying people to make problems disappear. His jaw tightened. I know. No more deciding for me because you think protecting me means hiding the truth. I know that too. For a second, neither of us said anything. The whole room seemed to understand it was no longer theirs. His executive team left without being told. The door closed behind them, and at last we were alone with the wreckage and the choice after it. Daniel came closer, but slowly, as if I had taught him caution and he was trying to honor the lesson. I thought loving you meant taking the hit by myself, he said. I thought if I handled everything, you wouldn't have to carry any of it. You don't get to erase me from my own life, I said, and my voice broke on the last word. He nodded once. I know. That was what undid me. Not the apology. Not the power in his name. Just the fact that this time, he was finally listening instead of arranging. I sat down because my knees gave out a little, and he knelt in front of me without dignity, without pride, without the armor that had made him seem unreachable the first night I met him. I loved you before it was convenient, he said quietly. Before it was safe. Before I knew what to do with it. And I have done almost everything wrong except that. Tears burned hot behind my eyes. You hurt me. I did. I was ready to leave. I know. I let out a small, broken laugh. You really have learned 2 words.